They expected rage. That was the only language they could understand. They had studied your reactions like scientists dissecting a creature they believed to be beneath them. They thought they knew the script. Hurt you and you roar. Undermine you and you retaliate. They were waiting for the explosion, timing it, planning around it, trying to provoke it so they could label it. They mistook your fire for volatility. They thought your mind was built for combustion. What they didn't understand was that silence is the final stage of mastery. It is not suppression. It is ascension. When you said nothing, the ground beneath them began to shift. Not because you lost, but because they had nothing left to feed on. You stripped them of their relevance by not even bothering to respond. You forced them to witness themselves without an opponent to distort the mirror. That silence. That was your final word, and it echoed longer than any scream could. They spent their lives studying chaos, yet silence is what drove them mad. You didn't flinch. You didn't post. You didn't beg for fairness. They waited for the outburst so they could cry victim and spin a narrative. But you starved their performance. You left their script untouched. No edits, no attention, no oxygen. And when you walked away, they realized something terrifying. The war wasn't mutual. It was never a battle between equals. It was a ritual, a test. You passed it by not needing to prove anything. Because once you hit that level of inner solidity, their weapons become stage props. Their attacks turn into echoes bouncing off the fortress you've become. And as they tried to sharpen their arrows, you had already stepped into realms beyond range. Anger is predictable. It's performative. It gives them material. They record it. They point to it. They distribute it to confirm their distorted worldview. But silence leaves them naked. It denies them relevance. It's a mirror held so still, so flawlessly. They are forced to watch their own ugliness with no filter. Silence isn't the absence of power. It's the final form of it. When you no longer feel the need to convince, explain, or retaliate, you've reached a level they can't calculate. They begin to see your restraint as something terrifying, because it speaks of a mind that has already weighed all outcomes and decided, without need for theatrics. You didn't ignore them out of weakness. You simply saw no value in allocating even your shadow toward their noise. Your silence was not passive. It was pressure. It was the kind of stillness that compresses timelines. The moment you refused to respond, they began unraveling. Every day they waited for a sign, a crack, a misstep, but you gave them the purity of absence. That absence haunted them. It became the main character of their thoughts. They started conversations in empty rooms, as if you might appear. They rehearsed arguments against a ghost. Their mind needed closure. Your silence was the denial of closure. You didn't argue the facts. You just became undeniable through action. No announcement, just dominance. No campaign, just clarity. You let their gossip fade like fog against a stone wall. No resistance, no engagement. And that hurt more than any confrontation ever could. In their version of reality, you were supposed to need them. Their approval, their attention, their narrative. But when you stopped speaking, they realized something primal. They never had influence. They had distraction. They were never the architect, just the noise outside the cathedral. And when you went silent, they were left shouting at stone. The echo hit them harder than any insult you could have crafted, because in that stillness, they saw the one thing they feared most: indifference. Not the cold type, the divine kind, the kind that radiates from someone who has truly transcended the battlefield. You didn't take the bait because you had already conquered the game. They were still learning how to cheat in. They used to walk with their chest out, feeling clever for having pushed your buttons. But now they walk slower. They think longer. They reread your old messages, hoping to find signs they missed. They analyze silences like sacred texts, because that's all they have now. You, silent, distant, watching maybe, but engaged, never again. They cannot provoke what has transcended them. They cannot label what has become uncategorizable. And so, your absence becomes the most terrifying presence they've ever encountered. They wanted closure. You gave them a cliff. They wanted reaction. You gave them reflection. And now they live in it. The silence didn't just remove you from the stage. It rewrote the play. Their roles no longer make sense. The drama collapsed without its counterweight. They were rehearsing for an audience that no longer exists. You were the gravity, the antagonist, the one who made the room feel sharp. Without your voice, they became dull. All that remains is the hollow sound of them explaining a war you didn't participate in. And the more they talk, the more ridiculous they sound. Because everyone can see now, your silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. It was the art of letting truth do the talking, even if it took time. Because time, unlike them, is on your side. You weren't quiet because you lacked words. You were quiet because your words would have been wasted. They had already decided what they wanted to believe. So you let them carry their assumptions like dead weight. And when the weight got heavy enough, they began to collapse beneath it. You watched them buckle under stories they invented. You let them drown in the fiction they authored. And every time someone asked for your side, you didn't offer a defense. You offered results, elevation, evolution. While they rotted in gossip, you built in silence. While they speculated, you executed. And now the contrast is so blinding. Their lies can't survive in the light you've become. Most people think silence is about control. It's not. It's about clarity. You weren't silent because you wanted to manipulate the moment. You were silent because you saw through it. The distraction, the bait, the trap, and you made a decision no one saw coming. You chose discipline over drama, presence over pride, legacy over ego. That is not silence. That is weaponized clarity. And the ones who thought they were playing you were left with the wreckage of their own moves. You didn't win by reacting. You won by removing the need to respond entirely. They waited for the outburst so they could cry victim and spin a narrative. That was the trap. Their strategy didn't require truth. It required timing. They knew that if they could push you hard enough, provoke you at just the right angle, catch you at your edge, they could finally collect the evidence they needed to rewrite reality. They weren't after justice. They were hunting performance. A slip, a snarl, a single sharp word thrown in a moment of fatigue. That was their currency. They'd clip it out, strip it of context, lace it with distortion, and parade it like a trophy. Because if they could capture your reaction, they wouldn't need to acknowledge your reasoning. And they were willing to lose 10 steps just to win that one moment on tape. That one moment when you stopped being calculated and became emotional. Because that was their goal all along. Make you look like the villain. While they stood in the ashes they started, pretending they were just survivors of your fire. They watched your silence with irritation, not because it hurt them directly, but because it robbed them of the narrative they needed to survive. They thrive on contradiction. Poke the lion, then cry about the claw marks. That's their entire ecosystem. Provocation followed by performative shock. Conflict initiated with plausible deniability. Then, when you react with the full weight of your awareness, they frame it as overkill. They don't want peace. They want footage. Something they can use to plant the seed of public doubt. Because if they can't beat you intellectually, they will try to bury you emotionally.